Okay, everyone, Piscama, agus Falcha. My name's Neil Martin, and super warm welcome to everyone today. A very large number of people on the call, so I appreciate your turning off cameras and microphones. People from all over the world. I don't know what time it is in the United States, but you're very welcome. I'm delighted to welcome Professor Margaret Bennett to give our seminar today. She's been a staff member of the School of Scottish Studies and of the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland and lectured regularly in the United States as well as in other countries beyond Scotland. She's a well-respected teacher. Her publications, such as Scottish Customs from the Cradle to the Grave, are widely valued as essential textbooks and resources for students and for all with an interest in Scottish folklore and ethnology, including, importantly, its Canadian dimensions. Her subject today is a man who played an outstanding part in the folk revival of the 1950s and 60s, and later both here and in the USA, where he makes his home. Norman Kennedy has made his mark in both the world of Scots and Gaelic song, and in the world of weaving and fabric traditions, and there is no one better than Margaret Bennett to celebrate him today. So welcome, Margaret, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Neil, and thank you to Maggie for arranging the programme and inviting me, and actually even for suggesting the subject. I was so excited, and then after I started on it, I really thought she'd given me the history of the world to create. I'm going to share my screen with you because I've got obviously some memories and slides, so I'll share it, and hopefully I have the right one to share, just like that. And I'm going to put a slideshow on.
Johnny, my man, do you nae think o' rising? The day it's far spent and the nicht's coming on. Your cellars are deen and your stoops steam afore ye. Rise up, my man Johnny, and come awa hame. Fa is that I hear speaking so kindly, I ken it's the voice of my ain wifey Jean. Come and be my dearie and sit down aside me. There's room in this tavern for mair forbies me. Johnny, my man, nor bairns is a greeting, nae meal in the barrel, tae fill our wee wines. While ye sit here drinking, ye leave me lamenting. Rise up, my man Johnny, and come awa hame. Do ye nae remember the first days we courted? On a bed o' primroses we baith did sit down, a-picking the flowers in each other's company. Ye ne'er thocht it long then, nor socht to go hame. Weel day I mind on the days that ye mention, but those times they are past and they'll ne'er come again. Just think on the present and try to amend it. Rise up, my man Johnny, and come awa hame. Johnny raised up and he flung the door open. My curse on the tavern, that first loot me in. My curse on the whisky that mocks me aye frusky. Say far the wheel whisky and I'm awa hame.
It was very difficult to choose a song, and that wasn't the first one I ever heard Norman sing. In fact, these Zoom calls have allowed a bunch of us old folkies to get together, and all of us acclaimed a 1965 gathering at the Pollock Hall in Edinburgh as being a phenomenally outstanding occasion where Norman, without any doubt, touched so many hearts and minds and actually blew us all away, I think is the phrase we're looking for. That recording was made by the Smithsonian in 1969, but the first person, as far as I can gather, to record him was actually the School of Scottish Studies' own John MacInnes. And they met quite a number of years before that, and this is the track listing of a tape that John made in 1960, and he begins by asking Norman where he learnt them.
Where was it you learnt your songs, Mr. Kennedy? Did you just hear them from the time you were a child?
Oh, I suppose, really, you just hear them and you just mind
Did you have them in your own family?
No, there's none of my folk the least bit interested.
Uh-huh.
John went on to record the Overgate and commented on it.
So I get up the Overgate and met a fair young lass, and she gave me a wink with a tail of worry as she get walking past. Recky-doo-dum-day, doo-dum-day, recky-decky-doo-dum-day. I asked her if her name was, and says she, it's Mary Rose, and I'm biding up the Overgate at the feta beef gone close. Recky-doo-dum-day, doo-dum-day, recky-decky-doo-dum-day. I speered for wish a bedwy, and says she, I'm Mistress Bruce, and I got an invitation to gang to the lodging house. Recky-doo-dum-day, doo-dum-day, recky-decky-doo-dum-day. Now as we get ben the beef can close, I had been rather dark. He took my money for man's sight pooch, and I walked it to the tail of my sark. Recky-doo-dum-day, doo-dum-day, recky-decky-doo-dum-day. Now we get down the lodging house, and on a chair sat down. But she gave me a wink with a tail of worry, says she come in the room. Recky-doo-dum-day, doo-dum-day, recky-decky-doo-dum-day. And I fed her pies and porter, I fed her ham and beer, and I swear she ate and drunk as muckle as I do in a year. Recky-doo-dum-day, doo-dum-day, recky-decky-doo-dum-day. Syne we went to bed contentedly to spend a peaceful night, fin a knock had come at the bedroom door at the bracken o' daylight. Recky-doo-dum-day, doo-dum-day, recky-decky-doo-dum-day. And then come to a policeman and they ta'en me by the hair, and I did a hurly-burly and my shirt fell down the stair. Recky-doo-dum-day, doo-dum-day, recky-decky-doo-dum-day. And all night long I dreamt I lay of the arms of Mary Rose, but fin I walked I was lying on my back at the feta beef gone close. Recky-doo-dum-day, doo-dum-day, recky-decky-doo-dum-day. No, I a jolly blue boys far gyan out for a lark, just you be like me fin you gang the spree tie your money to the tail of your sark. Recky-doo-dum-day, doo-dum-day, recky-decky-doo-dum-day. No, I'm a wat to Aberdeen, they made a less for me, for they seem to tuck the lane on the blue boys and Dundee. Recky-doo-dum-day, doo-dum-day, recky-decky-doo-dum-day.
You hear from anybody particular?
Well, I got some of the words for a lassie that her father kent some of the words.
Aye.
He based in Glenlivet.
Uh-huh. That's fuller than Jeannie's version, you know.
Yes,
Is it?
it's much.
Yeah, Jeannie's got the beginning and the verse beginning all night long. but not the piece in between.
Well, the folk used to bide in Aberdeen right enough, but they went up to Glenlivet to work in a distillery. Yep.
Which was a revelation to Norman, and it's also a cue for all of us to not assume that he learnt his songs verbatim and reproduced them. He in fact had strands of many varieties in his songs and in his singing. So there it is, the tape at the School of Scottish Studies. I wanted though to look back, who introduced me to Norman Kennedy? Well, it was this man here right in front of us, Davy Danoon. And it was before that wonderful gathering in 1965. Dave Danoon was a school friend of Norman's, and they were lads together, and they both knew Jeannie. They both sang, although both of them were speaking English at school, plain English. And they remembered songs they used to know, and it was Dave Danoon who brought Norman across one day to have a session with Jeannie. However, he met her long before then, and I thought, well, I must try to ask Norman himself, when did all this happen?
I will build you a bower down by yon clear fountain, and I'll cover it down with a flowers of the mountain. I will range the mountain side and the dark glen so weary, and I'll bring on my spoil to the bower of my dearie.
The unmistakable voice of Jeannie Robertson. It's a voice that's travelled the world on recordings, but there may be very, very few people around today who actually knew Jeannie. And you were a neighbour. Tell me when you first met her. I know you were young.
Well, we got bombed out for the tenements in Barra Road. This is before my 7th birthday. I remember it perfectly well, every minute of the bombing. But anyway, we were put into council houses. We were in Barnamall Road, which is now the boulevard, the big granite tenements doing it to fit to the boulevard. So well, they put us across to Pataudry, Ardaric Road, and right opposite was Jeannie and her mother. I remember her mother, never mind Jeannie, you know. And I remember her brother of hers and a sister of hers that I saw when I was little, you see.
Is that the prefab she talks about?
Huh?
Is that the prefab?
No, it's
before the prefab.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I think the prefab was up in Hayden.
Right.
I think that is weird.
And everybody knows a wonderful story about how Hamish knocked at her door, but this is quite considerably before that. So this would be the year you were bombed out. Okay, it would be.
Well, I was born 33. This would be 1940.
Now, as a 7-year-old, did you already know you were a singer?
Well, my ma could sing, my dad could sing, sang, music hall songs. He's a smashing singer.
Yes.
I didn't know many people that didn't have a song. In a party that says, "Get your song."
That was
Get your
it.
song.
Yes.
And everybody, I could tell my granddad, not my grandma. I only knew one grandma. The other one died once before I was born. Yep.
In that same session, I had in front of me a letter from Hamish Henderson to Norman Kennedy, written in February 1953. Norman had almost forgotten. And it's a 6-page letter in which Hamish talks about songs and says how happy he is that Norman is interested. So they had met some time before that, and I don't think Norman had yet visited the School of Scottish Studies, but he'd certainly met Hamish in the northeast. And it's a remarkable document of the time, and of course well worth preserving. But then he went on to say that when I asked him, what about Gaelic? When did you start to learn Gaelic? He said, oh, I was still at school, said Norman. I wanted to learn the language because, you know, that didn't really die out in the northeast. Folks say it did, but there was words there that I knew, and my grandmother remembered those words, he said. And when he saw in the newspaper an advertisement that they were going to have the International Conference of the Folk Narrative Congress in Stornoway, he wrote to Stornoway to say, can I go to this? And he had a very nice letter back saying, oh yes, it can all be arranged. And he said it was his first, he flew from Aberdeen to Stornoway, booked into a B&B, and was absolutely surrounded by very prestigious academics from all over the world. This is when, of course, he met the memorable Annie Johnson and the equally memorable Duncan MacDonald. And among the papers, Norman's papers, is the documents from that memorable time when Duncan, unknown to everybody, unknown to himself actually, was reciting a story that had been recorded just a few years before and transcribed. And he recited the tale almost word for word with very few phrases differently. That struck Norman so forcibly, the marvel of the oral tradition, and it was still alive. So he clipped out of the newspaper the three noted Gaels from the time, Duncan MacDonald, and he was just a remarkable man. He sadly died the year later. But he was to carry on a relationship with Annie Johnson that lasted for the rest of her life. Within a very short time, he was, I should mention that they went to Oban, to the Maud afterwards, and he travelled all the way from Stornoway, across on a ferry and down on a bus to Oban, sitting beside the man who first recorded him, John MacInnes. So there's your connection to 1953 is when they met. And in fact, John went up to Aberdeen to record Norman. He was so taken with his singing and his knowledge of tradition. Annie Johnson was his mentor, and he learnt Gaelic songs from her, as he said, washing the dishes, but not just the songs, the whole way of life. And each day he would learn something new. He was very keen to learn about the spinning, the weaving, the dyeing, and we're going to come to that shortly, because that certainly stood him in good stead. But meanwhile, back in Aberdeen, an employee of the tax office, no less, not totally enamoured with the job, but it was a job. And but meanwhile, he had a loom of his own, not encouraged at home, and was very happy then to find an adjacent a flat in the same tenement as his parents, so he could put the loom there and at least do some weaving, even although his parents weren't keen that a man like Norman with a lot of ability should take up something like weaving, which really was you were destined for a life of poverty. That's what weaving meant to them. But learn he did, and a lot of it he did by his own research, and absolutely fueled by what he had learnt with Annie Johnson and all of the families and community in Barra. But as a member of the club, and of course a good friend of Arthur Argo, who was the founder of the Aberdeen Club, this is from 1964, and if you can't read it, it's worth reading. Norman Kennedy took London by storm when he and Arthur Argo went down for the English Folk Dance and Song Society Conference of Clubs. He was offered more than 30 dates in English clubs, and at the Singford Club run by Ewan MacColl and Peggy Seeger, the two of them, and on it goes. He meets A.L. Lloyd, and then he meets Gordon MacCulloch and Bobby Campbell, who were living in London at the time. But he does complain that they don't really have the right whiskey there. And the same chapbook, I think this is Peter Hall's writing, but somebody else can correct me if I'm wrong, one of Norman's songs. And before long, Mike Siegel, who was touring Scotland, heard Norman sing, and the following year he was invited to the Smithsonian. Soon afterwards met the likes of Ralph Rinsler, who was to make sure that he not just was heard, but would be in the company of many other tradition bearers, singers, folklorists, field workers, and they would absolutely put everything into recording Norman and recording people he met, memorably the Cape Bretoners. And he travelled to Cape Breton with Ralph Rinsler, and they did a considerable number of recordings. I had a great pleasure to return there with him just 2 years ago, and Norman will be smiling ear to ear. He wondered what could be left after all those years. But you know, you would be amazed the number of people who came out just to see him and who remembered sharing their songs with him. And I think it's not surprising that he's got a phenomenal repertoire, which includes many Cape Breton songs. I should have said before we left the page of the chapbook and Arthur Argo on that page that even by that time Norman Kennedy had one of the most remarkable repertoires, and to this day I doubt if there's anybody whose Scots song repertoire surpasses Norman's. It's hours and hours in the singing, and it's thanks to numbers of people, including Tom Spears, who I saw a few moments ago, and Pete Shepherd, who recorded him and encouraged him to make recordings. Before long, he was offered a job at the Williamsburg Museum, and he got over the terrible, terrible disappointment that his tax office wouldn't give him an extended leave of absence beyond the 2 weeks of holiday of a year. And so I suppose, summarising it in today's terms, he said, well, stuff your job. And the next thing we know, he's going to Williamsburg, where he became the weaver in residence. And not only was he going to weave in the traditional styles and dyes that he'd learned about in the outer islands, but he was to find himself in an area, when you think about where it is, there's not such a call for the warm wool that we need all year round in Scotland, but the flax. And that had not really been known as a handloom weaving trade for a very long time. Although I live in Perthshire and there are weavers' cottages around here, and lots of yes, and indeed the bleach fields of Perthshire are quite famous. But it's been many a year since anybody has pulled flax. Bell Stewart was among them. But Norman taught himself the skills involved in that as well. And here you can, I just snip through the magazine. This little, these patterns, by the way, are to turn up in somebody's field notebook later on, as well as on this page, and perhaps two wonderful parallel incidences. I'll come to that. While there, he was to become familiar with the most basic of wooden frame looms, and looms indeed of all kind, not just how they're made, but how to maintain them. Did you know, by the way, that you can get wooden gears, and he's using an adze there. Now, wonderful songs in Gaelic which talk about using an adze. That's a much more skilled thing than an axe. And to visit Norman, as many of us around this room have done, in his home in Vermont, is to be surrounded by memorabilia from those years. The man is a walking example of tradition, integrated in every single way. There's nothing in front of us there that he either hasn't had a hand in making or creating. Yes, including the gooseberry jam in the middle. Yes, and the fair owl sweater in the corner. Oh yes, you can dye your own wool, spin your own wool and all, and knit it. You know, they're knitted all in one piece. Oh, and those little shuttles, yes, you can make them when you run out. I was reminded by, in fact, I have to thank Louise at the School of Scottish Studies for sending me an email to ask about what memories do I have of fieldwork or pictures from the School of Scottish Studies. And in fact, I remember from the first day I went through the door, these photos came into my sight quite often, and I used to look at them and think, what fantastic photos. They're the fieldwork of Eric Regine, and that's on the back of one of them. And when visiting Norman, I'd never seen anyone use a flail, but I had to do a double take. Norman, I said, is that a flail? Oh yes, said he, picking it up.
You'd have some of them swing it like a spreadle to you. What you would do, you'd have the sheaves with their heads together, like that, and then you'd knock it out, and then you'd turn them.
And on we went. And thinking about it, Norman had always said he would love to come back to Scotland and to do a tour of the outer islands. He'd been back to the northeast many times, thanks to the Stonehaven Folk Festival and to folksong in Fife and the TMSA festivals. But he said it had been many a long year since he'd been to Barra or to the islands. And so those photos, the one of the flailing, and I thought, oh gosh, maybe we could marry two projects and graft Norman a tour onto a project that was very important, the work and fieldwork of Eric Regine. You can see the photos in an exhibition. And so also among those notebooks was this delightful page, which is from Maggie Mackay. Maggie's handwriting on a field trip to where's it taken? It says here, yes, oops, come back. Describes Drugget, and each thread is counted. Now that reminded me of Norman's counting on the loom. So I thought we can involve this, and as it happened, it was a year of sustainability, language, culture and sustainability. How perfectly all this could fit together. And thanks to a lot of help from, yes, there's a weaver in front of us. He was on the screen a minute ago, Jimmy Hutchison from US and now an adopted Fifer, who wove a piece of cloth, and also to Anna MacLean in Barra, who said, we'll bring him back to Barra and he will meet them all again. And in fact, on that tour, a Cayley and a Luach in the school in Barra brought in the niece and nephew of the same Annie Johnson, who sang round the table.
More than you. That's one of my
It was just a marvellous experience to have them sit around the table, and Norman hearing with great delight, actually. Her niece sang one of the songs, and her nephew, Roddy Campbell, some people will know him, sang also. And we're moving on. In Uist, and again, I've got another piece of wonderful video of Kathy Lane singing at the Lua on that very piece of cloth, and she sang a song which Norman was almost in tears. He spoke of it the other day. He said, "I couldn't believe it," he said, "meeting the grandniece of Ali Thowell. I felt I was with nobility sitting at this table. How reassuring," he said, "to go back to the outer islands and to hear the language sung so naturally and so beautifully." And believe it or not, this is across the Vermont-Quebec border. And the host of the occasion is sitting right here, Daniel O'Day, who invited whoever wished to come for a weekend and meet the man who spoke the language of the first settlers of that area of Quebec. So Norman came, and we had a luau, and this is towards the end of it, it had been soaked and we'd been pounded around the table, and at the last stage was going to be folded out.
No, what we're going to do is pull it up. Make it nice and tight, nice and smooth. You see, it's almost dry, you know. They had to get the water out of it. It's slapping songs. But I can't have force me snahoro, mahilo, shine or an alas snahoro, mahilo, haga bishal mutter boti horo, mahilo, shine or an alas snahoro, mahilo, suliga shuka shnaka horo, mahilo, shine or an alas snahoro, mahilo, Gavione Kekken Moro, Lahilo, Shaino, Nahoro, Lahilo, Hachikes Jakan and Patahoro, Lahilo, Shaino, Nahoro, Lahilo, Hachikes Jakan and Castahoro, Lahilo, Shaino, Nahoro, Lahilo, Shaino. I haven't done that for a while. And at the end, I'm going to turn it over. You turn it 3 times sunwise and ask a blessing on it, which was good. Oh, some of the blessings were long. So that would be good health and good fortune to the person who would.
I don't know if Norman was aware that at the table was the local minister, which was a marvellous, and he was absolutely delighted. In fact, there were very few English speakers around the table, that is first language English speakers, and it was thrilling to see how many people came from far and wide just to hear him and to sing with him and to learn how it was that the first settlers of that area did the cloth. They were from Harris and Lewis and North Uist, and indeed the last one of them, Gaelic speaking, whom Norman met, just died the very last day of 2020. So that lasted a long time. As we stepped outside and the flags flying outside Daniel's auberge, Norman felt that he was being more than in a part of Scotland. He's an amazing ambassador for Scotland. Wherever he goes, he carries with the most vast array of tradition and of songs, and indeed he is more than worth celebrating. Little wonder he won and was awarded the 2003 National Endowment for the Arts Award. To that point, the only non-American, and he won it in 2 categories, which really are one for crafts and one for music. But, as he says himself, there is no difference. You have to understand the way of life to understand the songs. And if you don't understand the way of life, how can you understand the songs? And he has certainly done a marvellous job of creating that understanding for all who come and listen to him. I can stop sharing my screen and let you hear some more of Norman singing. And I think I'll just do that, because how else should we conclude but with, we'll have this one, Molly Bawn, one of the favourites.
Molly Bawn means she's fair-haired. Bawn in Gaelic means fair-haired, you see. And I heard this song long, long ago. Come Molly, young heroes, who handle a gun, Beware of night rambling by the setting of the sun, and be aware of an accident that happened of late to young Molly Bawn, and sad was her fate. She was gone to her uncle's when a shower came on. She went neath a green bush the shower to shun. With her white apron round her, he took her for a swan. It's a sob and a sigh it was, of Molly Bawn. He quickly ran to her and saw that she was dead, and it's many's the salt tear on her bosom he shed. He went home to his father with his gun in his hand, crying, "Father, dear father, I have shot Molly Bawn. I have shot that young Colleen. I have taken the life of the one I intended to take for my wife." Oh, Johnny, young Johnny, do not run away. Don't you leave your own country till your trial day. Don't you leave your own country till your trial comes on, for you'll never be convicted for the loss of a swan. The night before Molly's funeral, her ghost did appear, crying, "Mother, dear mother, young Johnny, he's clear." I was gone to my uncle's when a shower came on. I went neath a green bush the shower to shun. With my white apron round me, he took me for a swan. But tell him he's forgiven by his own Molly Bawn. The girls in this country, they are all very glad, since the pride of Glenallen, Molly Bawn, is now dead. All the girls in this country, stand them all in a row, Molly Bawn would shine above them like a mountain of snow.
What can you say? We could be here for hours and days with a most remarkable singer, tradition bearer, craftsperson. I had some photographs which I can actually post at some point else, and if anybody would like to receive a complete transcript of the Norman interview, sitting on the couch there in Harris, by the way, we were about to meet up with Jimmy, who's in my screen in front of me anyway, and we were going to go on to the other islands, and we had just a day off. Robin was with us, and I took that short time out to interview him, and some remarkable things came out of that. So I can send that full transcript if anybody would like it. It's too long to put on the chat box. And the other thing is, I would like to thank those who actually helped to do some of these videos. I just seen the cameraman for that Quebec one, Skip Gorman, in the audience. Hello, Skip, and thank you for grabbing my mobile phone actually, well, to do that. And to Daniel for hosting it. In fact, so many people. I saw Ruth there. Too many to name. There are hundreds now of photographs and slides and pieces of films, and two outstanding photographs of the tweed jacket that Norman submitted. not only that, but a linen shirt. It's all very well to sing, tell her to make me a cambric shirt, but it's another thing to grow the flax, do the redding and the scratching and so on, and to spin the flax in the finest linen, and then to sew it right down to the last buttonhole. That's Norman Kennedy. That's Norman Kennedy. He's a lot to celebrate. Thank you very much for being here and for listening, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Margaret, thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic, masterful presentation, and you found such rich material as well, archive videos and song and walking